Little Women is directed by Greta Gerwig and stars an ensemble cast including Saoirse Ronan, Emma Watson, Florence Pugh, Timothée Chalamet, Laura Dern, and Meryl Streep, and is based off of the beloved novel that had been adapted into film about 6 other times from the big to the small screens. And if I'm being honest, I really can't tell you what this movie is about. I've never read the book myself, nor have I ever watched any adaptation of the novel prior to this one, so I really don't know what I'm getting into. Although, I have watched the show Friends, and they do talk about a moment in the book, and that kind of gave me an idea of some of the story beats in the movie. And for those of you who watch Friends either regularly or at least you have a fair amount of knowledge in it, you probably know which scene I'm talking about. But other than that, mostly I'm going in for the cast and just the fact that this is Gerwig's second, technically third, film that she's directed. And her last one, Lady Bird, was one of my favorite movies of 2017. And just one of those films that really spoke to me emotionally for this entire decade. It's the kind of film that makes me contemplate doing a favorite movies of the decade kind of film. Something that I'm still only thinking about, but that'll at least give you guys an idea where my head is at right now as we get closer to New Year's. And I'll most likely come back with a proper synopsis, hopefully when I get back from the movie in a couple hours. And then I can really get into my normal shit. Now, before I get into my thoughts on the film, which again will be like 2 hours, 2 hours from now, the way that I convey my thoughts is I do a pro and con list. It helps me to best articulate and best catalog the good or the bad in my opinion. And while I try to keep the sections separate, if I can make a pro and con work off of each other, or if they're intrinsically tied together, then I will always take advantage of that. Anyway, there's your disclaimer, and I'll see you guys again in a couple hours after I get back from seeing Little Women.
This is Meg, Amy, Beth, and Joe.
So the basic idea of the movie, the synopsis, I'll instead be talking a bit about it in the first pro. This is another coming-of-age film, like Lady Bird before it. The film which made everyone look at Greta Gerwig as a talent behind the camera as both a director and a writer, and she shows that this is definitely a strong area for her in these coming-of-age stories in this movie. In this, we follow these sisters, Beth, Amy, Meg, and Joe, with Joe getting the majority of the focus, but not lessening the importance of the shared and/or personal stories of the other sisters. The film focuses, sure, on the romantic angle with these girls, the romances that they all go through, but a fair bit goes into their social and economic status, especially in regards to how women were looked at in society. These girls come from a lower class family. They're struggling for work the majority of the movie, and in this world, which this takes place in as early as the early 1860s, around the Civil War time, and women rarely succeeded on their own in the world. They had to search for a wealthy man to marry so that they'd have support. And we get to see multiple perspectives on this topic. You get the one that marries for love, you get the one that idolizes the high society, and definitely wants to be a part of that world. That world that I just mentioned. You got the shy one who doesn't really make such things a priority. And of course, you've got the tomboy who wants to focus on being her best self and doesn't prioritize love in any way, and actually has a disdain for how the world views love. And of course, each character grows into their own as the film goes on, which I loved a lot of the stuff that I just mentioned on how they tackled it. Of course, there are times during the film where maybe I didn't particularly care for the stories of a particular sister compared to the other ones, and maybe I would see something and think, okay, how did we get to this point with her? And then it would hurt the pacing a bit for me. As for performances, everyone is great, and I do have a couple of particulars, namely The first is Saoirse Ronan, who was in Gerwig's last film, and she gives another great performance as Jo, of course, making me once again forget that she has a natural, thick Scottish accent, because she just masks it beautifully. I didn't even ever start to question her accents until I saw her in an interview for Lady Bird, and I was pretty sure that I was having a stroke, because I didn't know that what came out of the mouth of this girl who sounds like an American in interviews, she just had this really thick accent, as though, I don't know, I'm honestly blanking on a very well-known Scottish character that has, you know what, Scotty from Star Trek, fucking that kind of voice comes out of her mouth, and I'm like, what the fuck? And also we had Timothée Chalamet, who also starred in Lady Bird alongside Ronan, gives another really good performance as this rich boy named Laurie, who becomes the object of affection for some of the sisters. And I really hope that both of these actors continue to be consistent workers with Gerwig. Maybe not always as the leads, but still there nonetheless. Gerwig just brings out some of their best performances. And also, on that side note, for performances, Emma Watson gives another really good performance. I also found myself enjoying Eliza Scanlon, who played Beth. I don't know too much about Scanlon, though. I've heard that people loved her in HBO's Sharp Objects, and this movie definitely has me interested in seeing what she has next. Same as I did for Florence Pugh, who's also in this movie, when I saw her performance in Midsommar, and she gives another excellent performance here. And of course, you've got the veterans, Laura Dern and Meryl Streep. They don't disappoint. Really, the way that I see the performances from both this and Lady Bird is that Greta Gerwig is really proving herself to be an actor's director, and that's not. It's not surprising seeing that she started out in acting with a couple of writing credits here and there, and one other directing movie before she did Lady Bird. But I don't know, she's the best kind of person for that kind of for that kind of term. There's great subtlety in how this movie manipulates your emotions. This plays like a Christmas movie for much of the runtime, which apparently for some people, they look back at the 1994 version with Winona Ryder and Susan Sarandon and Kirsten Dunst and, I don't know, a couple of other people that I can't think of off the top of my head. But a lot of people look at that movie as a Christmas movie. Even my mother and my sister would watch it every year, though I don't personally recall doing that with them, but that's beside the point. It feels like a lighthearted Christmas movie at times, but then the film can naturally transition into heated arguments between characters and even some more heartbreaking moments that I won't give away if you haven't read the book or any of the books that followed, or even if you haven't seen an adaptation of the story before. And, like I hadn't, but Gerwig struck a really good balance between the light and the dark in this story, and I was left with a film that felt consistent in tone despite the fact that the opposite was true, that, these light and dark tones are, generally clashing tones, but it really worked with that. That, and in line with the lighthearted feel of the movie, much of the film has a charm and an energy to it, particularly in the first half of the film, which felt symbolic to where the characters felt in their lives. Though they were obviously in their teen to young adult years to start off, it very much feels like they're still living in their childhood. And the film also plays around with timelines, with a non-linear chain of events. I don't know if any of the other movies did this, or if the book or books did this, but I don't know. It was just something that I noticed, and sometimes it would be easy to tell where you were in the timeline, because the color correction of the sequences in the past would be extremely lush, thus going back to the more lighthearted feel, and then the ones in the past would kind of have more of a gray hue over the sequences. However, this idea was not perfect. In the third act, there's a part where the timelines are getting closer and closer together, and for me personally, it was a bit more difficult to tell which part I was in, especially because things that were happening in the quote-unquote present directly mirrored something that was shown in the past mere seconds ago, and it would just bounce back and forth. It was... Sure, there would be times where, in order to differentiate what time period it was, the characters would have different hair. But the issue was that sometimes it would be one shot would be in the past, one shot would be in the present, and they do it a couple of times, and at that point, you're not really focusing on the little tiny clues. You're more focusing on, okay, where the hell am I in this timeline? And as you figured, this being a period piece, that would of course be weird if it wasn't considered to be Oscar material even before the movie came out. The production and costume design are immaculate and impeccable, which technically those words mean the same thing, but not really, but I'll just go with it. This film truly felt like it was a time capsule into another time, and the time capsule feel is also a credit to how great the cinematography was. It's beautifully shot, and it actually, the way that everything's constructed, it felt like a hybrid between classic and modern cinematography that doesn't clash, just like they found a way for the story tones not to clash. At the end of the day, I don't think that Little Women is as good as Lady Bird, but this is still a very enchanting time at the theaters. I was thinking back to when I did my my top 10 films of 2019, and I mentioned at the start of the film that I hadn't seen Little Women yet, and I wasn't sure, but it was possible that it could bump off something off my list. But looking at it now, it's really good, but it doesn't break my top 10. However, it does become like an extra honorable mention. I only had 2 in that video, so there you go. I got 3 honorable mentions for this year. But just the entire package of Little Women was great. It just floundered in some smaller ways for me. But I recommend this to anyone, even men. For some reason, if a film is more female-centric in its characters, the perception is that it's not for men. But I think men could enjoy this this movie too. But if you're not sure that you want to go in and see this movie, I say go for it. But anyway, guys, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to hit that like button and also subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, farewell until the next video, all of you casual moviegoers and movie fans alike, and keep on being awesome.